Okay, we're live.
There we go. All right, I'd like to call to order the June 3rd meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Ms. Brudno, if you would please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mr. Kanziger.
Here.
Mrs. Burrows.
Here.
Mrs. Garvey.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here.
All right. Don't have my background, so I'm going to hold it up in front of me. If you'll please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. I believe we have some minutes to go through and approve. Let's see here. I have a motion for the approval for the minutes. Let's see, May 6th, May 20th.
So moved.
And I will second those.
I did have some very minor edits, mostly they're typos. Ashley, if you're comfortable with it and the board, I'll just give those to you offline.
That's fine.
There's nothing material to the content. It was just typos.
Okay, great. Mrs. Brudno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. Burrows.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right, great. Next we have, excuse me, board reports. So we're going to go through board committee updates. If you have no updates since your last meeting, you can just say no update. Otherwise, you please give us a brief update of what's going on in your committee. So Mrs. O'Toole, if you cover the audit committee and board policy committee.
No report for the audit committee. For board policy committee, I can tell you that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 23rd at 1 p.m. and it will be a Zoom meeting.
All right.
That concludes my report.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Mrs. Garvey, if you would please cover the business advisory committee, capital planning, and board finance and budget.
Certainly. There's no report for business advisory. There is no report for capital planning, although I want to commend the work that is certainly being done on the campus right now to finish the tennis courts. It's looking really great. And with regard to the board finance and budget committee, we do have a planned meeting for Tuesday, June 30th. I think the time is still to be determined. That will also be via Zoom.
I assume, but I'm glad you clarified for me. All right, next up is record retentions, and I have no report for that committee. So moving off committee reports, next we have a distinguished guest, Mr. Fosicek, Anthony Fosicek. If you would please, I will yield the floor to you, Mr. Fosicek.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all this evening. I come to you today as a person who has 30 years in politics and wanted to speak to you a little bit about the levy you have coming up. My political career goes over, as I mentioned, 30 years. I've managed or staffed or consulted on campaigns from every level, from the U.S. Senate on down to local council races, village races, school board, etc. And a lot of what I'd like to present to you this evening is more just for background. I know you've got a tough decision to make this evening, but I think it's important to try to get you as much information to put this year's election and possibly the May primary election in 2021 into perspective, so you can be as informed as possible to make the decision you feel is best for the community. So let me share my screen. I'm assuming everybody can see this okay?
Yeah.
All right, so first off, I want to talk a little bit about running in a non-presidential year versus a presidential year. I've got some data Not a ton with the Geauga County, but some Cuyahoga County data, which I think will give you a broad overview of what elections normally look like. So recent levy performance in Cuyahoga County, these are some of the most recent elections. November of 18, there were 4 school levies that passed and 4 that failed. In May of 18, there were 3 school levies passed, 2 that failed. November of 17, 1 school levy passed, 1 failed. And May 7, 2017, 6 school levies passed, 2 failed. Generally speaking, levies have, in presidential years, a little more success than they do in non-presidential years. For example, November 2016, there were 13 levies passed, 1 failed. That was a presidential year. November of 2012, 10 school levies passed, 1 failed. The year I think most closely resembles this year is November of 2008. There were 6 school levies that passed, 6 failed. And as I mentioned, 2020 feels a bit more like 2008 for these reasons. These are kind of the key parallels as I see them. First off, we're dealing with economic uncertainty. In 2008, the Wall Street and housing markets had both crashed. We were leading into the Great Recession. Folks were uneasy, much like today, where unemployment could be considerably higher in the fall. There's a lot of political or a lot of economic uncertainty headed into the general election this year. Political fatigue. In 2008, it was 7 years of the war on terror. Folks were getting frustrated with the progress in Afghanistan and Iraq. And conversely, here at home, there seems to be a lot of political fatigue just with the constant bickering in Washington, the back and forth, the chatter and the noise, and a whole lot that doesn't seem to be getting accomplished. Anxiousness and uneasy electorate with polarized sides, that is very much this year. Campaigning is evolving on the fly. Now, 2008, campaigning really did change quite a bit. The Barack Obama campaign and John McCain campaigns both were using new technologies, new strategies, new methods to reach out to voters. This year, in part because technology has improved, and in larger part because the geography and the political landscape has changed so much with COVID-19, et cetera, campaigns are really having to reinvent how they contact and reach out to voters. And all early indications this year, as they were in 2008, is that 2020 is a change year. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Donald Trump is not reelected, but it does mean that the landscape underneath, the ground is shifting, and this has the potential to be one of those years that could swing heavily one way or the other. So running in a presidential year, as I'm sure you know, running a levy or a down ballot race is always hard enough. You're competing with numerous races. This year in particular, you've got congressional races, state legislative races, probably some local things that'll pop up, judges up and down the ballot, issues that'll probably appear. So when you're an issue candidate or an issue campaign, a levy campaign or a judicial campaign, it's always much challenging because the focus is always going to be at the top. So doing it in a presidential year is always much harder than doing it in, say, a primary or an off-year primary like 2021, where there might be very little, if anything, on the ballot other than your levy. One of the big challenges is competing with heavy media presence. And this year is going to be really, really tough. First of all, you're going to have saturated airwaves. The paid media on TV, radio, and social media will be very intense. Congressional races will generate some of that. The local state house races will generate some of that. But the majority of the money being spent this year is going to be related to the presidential race. And that doesn't even mean the presidential campaigns. PACs are going to be involved. You're going to have issue campaigns. It's going to be very intense. Earned media opportunities are going to be extremely limited. In a race like this, you're very limited on what you've got access to anyway. The plain dealer really not covering local politics as much anymore. Chagrin Valley Times would be a good example of probably one of the few areas you'll have an opportunity to penetrate. And mailboxes are going to be overloaded with literature for federal, state, local, judicial races, as well as PAC and union mailings trying to inform their members on who to support. This year may be more so than any other year in recent history for two big reasons. First of all, outreach to voters right now, traditional outreach, door knocking, phone calls are just not going to have much of an impact, if any, this year, because folks are afraid to answer the door because of COVID-19. Folks are afraid to volunteer and go door to door. And phone calls, the technologies are such now where blocking phone calls is just commonplace. So cracking through on the phones is going to be tough. So one of the few resorts to lean on is mailing. And don't think that other folks won't know it. More importantly, people are afraid of opening their mail now. So with COVID-19, we're finding more and more folks are just taking the mail that they get, not even reading it, just batch processing, throwing it right in the recycling or the trash, only keeping the things that they really want to bring into their house. Competing with message. This is another big area. It's really going to largely be driven by the presidential campaign and the news cycle. So cracking through to resonate and make your points is going to be especially challenging. Even on social media, that's going to be the case because folks are going to want to be talking about the things that are happening nationally, not so much on their local issues. And voters tend to focus most of their attention on the top of the ballot stuff. This year in particular, because it's a presidential year, that brings out what's called the low information voter. Those are voters who, and it's not really a slam, it's just, you know, what they're called. They're voters who rarely vote. They show up in they show up in only the presidential years, if then. They're usually unmotivated by midterm elections or by local elections or off-year elections. They're usually less informed on the races or the nuances of certain issues. They are paying attention to the top one or two races at the very top, but beyond that, they're really not that informed. It's one of the reasons why you see considerable drop-off in judicial races. The undervote is very high in those races. Very few people cast their ballot in those because they just don't know who the candidates are. And when it comes to levies, those people are more likely to vote no on the levies only because they know nothing about it, or they just are opposed to taxes, or they skip the race entirely. So the best you would hope for in a year like this would be that they would skip it if they're not going to vote for you. You certainly don't want them to vote no. So running in this presidential year, I would say throw the normal presidential campaign playbook out the window. There really is no precedent for the type of climate that we're experiencing right now. The media overload will be intense. I'd expect record spending on TV, radio, social media, direct mail. So again, even on social media, if you do an investment in social media, it's not going to be as you're not going to be able to target it and have the impact you want because so many other people are going to be doing the exact same thing. News coverage, as I mentioned, almost exclusively on the presidential race and COVID-19 and the economy, the three big things. And foreign interference, sowing seeds of mistrust and misinformation. This is just going to be happening. Folks are sharing memes, whether they're real or not. All of the chatter generally is going to kind of overshadow this levy campaign. The climate will be more intense than ever too. People are more polarized. Democrats and Republicans are motivated and passionate and outspoken. The economy is going to be extremely volatile this year. As you know, we're going to have record unemployment possible by November. That's going to challenge even supportive voters who have supported levies in the past to really weigh their own financial situation at home and decide whether or not their family can support even a renewal or what would appear to be a renewal. It just might be a decision they feel they can't make at this time. Institutions are also seeing high levels of distrust in numerous polls. So government, press, those types of bodies, and schools are going to be one of those. Folks are less likely to trust those institutions right now. There's just so much uncertainty and distrust. And health concerns are weighing heavily over everything this year. We don't really know what the climate's going to look like in November. No one can say for sure how schools are going to operate, how elections are going to operate. COVID-19 is likely to impact voter turnout. It might actually increase voter turnout. That's unlikely, but if a vote by mail campaign were heavily pushed by the state, it could actually increase voter participation. COVID-19 is going to remain a story throughout the summer and into the fall, so there's no getting around it. It's just going to be here. It will greatly impact how we campaign. As I mentioned before, door knocking, phone calls, those are types of things that we're not going to be able to do the way we used to do them in the past. And it's almost going to certainly impact how we vote. So how will we vote in 2020? We don't know right now if voting will even happen in person. We don't know if polling locations may change, if there'll be fewer, if there might be different polling locations. I know in some of the primaries that they've had over the last couple of weeks, states have gone from areas having thousands of polling locations in a large county to just having over 100. I think Pittsburgh was one of them yesterday that had scaled down almost by like 20% their normal polling location. So there's no guarantee that we'd even have a polling location open up in Chagrin Falls, although you would think it's likely, but things change. And we don't know if vote by mail is going to be expanded or limited. Early voting is also something that's in front of the state legislature right now. They're debating whether or not to make the number of days ahead of the election you could vote in person, like at the Board of Elections. That might be something they limit. And the last few cycles, the Secretary of State has mailed out vote by mail applications to voters. That may not occur this year, which makes it more challenging for folks to register to vote by mail. And it makes it even more challenging if we get into the final couple of weeks of the campaign and voters who traditionally vote at the polls might not understand the process to vote by mail and might be disenfranchised and not get a chance to cast their ballot. And not being able to plan for those types of voters makes it really challenging to determine how your vote is going to come out and how you target voters. So challenges for the Levy campaign in 2020. Again, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just laying the information out in front of you. You're going to be competing extensively for message and attention. Door knocking and canvassing is going to be unlikely. Things like PTA events, the town halls, football tailgates, social media opportunities, those are all going to be less likely, if unlikely, this fall. The economic uncertainty, obviously going to continue to weigh heavily over everything you do. It will be very difficult to control the narrative head on. You're not going to necessarily be able to, I know in the last Levy campaign, social media was very strong. We were able to counteract negative comments. Questions were answered very quickly. It's going to be harder to cut through the clutter to answer those questions more thoughtfully and more actively, proactively than it would be in a normal year. And there will probably be, although it may be somewhat disorganized, I said organized, there will probably be some opposition to the levy this year. If you ran it this year, there's going to be opposition anytime you ever have one, but it might be a little more vocal this year. Just chatter you might be able to see online right now. There are some folks who have already said that they wouldn't support a levy, and those are people who might have supported in the past. Opportunities for 2021 now might be entirely different. Things might have leveled off by then. Obviously, the political climate could improve. The economy might be rallying back at that point. Schools might be open, fully functioning. There could be a vaccine for COVID-19 at that point, or one could be very well on the way. I realize these are all ifs, and they're very big ones, but they're things to consider as you go into 2021. There's no guarantee that climate will be better than this fall. But again, just based on my observations, my thoughts, and the evidence that I've seen in front of me so far, this fall is going to be a tough go. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but I did want to kind of lay these all out for you. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the campaign and where we go.
Do we know in 2008, is that when we failed the levy and passed the levy? Is that the right year? In 2008?
2007.
Yeah, we did not have a levy in 2008.
Okay, it was 2007. Okay. And do you have any numbers on like how levies did in 2009, perchance, like the spring after?
I do. Hold on one second. 2009. You know what, Greg, I don't have that in front of me. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
One thing I was going to ask Anthony, so usually when we go through like what our history has been and what our expectations are, of course, one of the first things we always talk about is our pass rate. So in And in those years where you went through those different, how many levies passed, how many didn't pass, of course, first data questions comes to my mind is, what's that population like? What were the pass? I mean, I know they're Cuyahoga County, but, and you may not know this data, but I'm just trying to understand the underlying, data that's being presented. There's like, what were their pass rates during their years? Was it the first time that they'd gone, the second or third time that they'd gone, because I know whenever we're looking at our history, of course, we know when was the first time we were on the ballot. Okay, this was a retry. This is a second time. Maybe we failed this time, but we passed the second time. And we know that our pass rate is X. That's one thing we always talk about a lot with our data. I didn't know if you knew that data for the other years that you laid out there during presidentials.
I mean, beyond just the basic data, who voted and what the percentages were in those communities, I don't have a whole lot more beyond that. But I would caution you, even using that data right now, I don't know will give you enough to really make a good solid decision on. I guess the only data I would look to for this type of an election would be, in making the decision would be either looking at the off-year elections to see how they've done historically, or in comparable presidential years, of which I think 2008 is kind of the more comparable one. I mean, other presidential years, 12 and 16, levies did really well. I mean, you can't argue that. I mean, if you can get on the ballot in a year where it's not really a change year, where the electorate isn't super high energy polarized, I think you've always got a much better chance. But this year, I think all bets are off, and the economy is going to just weigh heavily on this one as well.
Anthony, I think we've invested in somewhat in the ability to message a no additional cost in November, and we, some of us have placed an amount. I think all of us place a amount of weight in that. It's just how much. If I were to ask you to kind of balance that with the political landscape.
Bob, I lost you on the.
Your speaker's doing that thing again, Bob.
All right, how am I doing now?
Yeah, you're better.
So I think November is appealing at some level to everyone due to the fact that there would not be an increase in tax. So there's a positive message that to be told there. I just wanted you to kind of maybe balance that with political landscape and weigh that and give us your thoughts on that.
It's without a doubt the most positive message you can make this fall is that there will probably be no increase at all. It's not an increase. I mean, if you go in the fall, that's the message, and I wouldn't even move off of it. I don't even know what 2, 3, and 4 would be after that. If you go in the spring, I would try to get it as close to that as you can, and then articulate, why it would be slightly higher or why it would be higher. But if you're going to go this fall, that's pretty much the only message that I think would connect.
If we wait till the spring, it will be significantly higher is one of the challenges, because, we don't start collecting till the following January. We would have been a whole year of significant deficit spending. So we have a lot of ground to make up. So, right now we were kind of thinking 3.85, no additional tax in the fall, or it's probably 7.9 in the spring.
And what would happen if it failed this fall?
We would probably right back in the spring with the larger one.
So, and I think that's a tougher sell. I'm not saying you don't do it, but I think if it failed this fall, to come back and then have to ask for more in the spring might be even harder to climb.
Anthony, have you ever worked on a school levy where it hasn't been an increased cost to the community?
In the interest of full disclosure, I've not actually worked on a race outside of the Chagrin where I've been involved in a decision-making process. So, I've worked on levy campaigns in a volunteer capacity or pro bono, but I have not not done a school board race that way. And so to answer your question, no, I don't recall one way or the other.
Your reaction tonight is powerful and very helpful, that is such a important component of our decision making. I just think our levy committee is going to need to put some thought around the most succinct way to accurately message that. I was just wondering if you had been exposed to anything like that, but we can do that research later.
One other question, we talked a lot about presidential elections. I mean, does it make a difference whether it's like an incumbent election or not? I mean, 2008 was, I just looked it up real quick because I forgot already. That was a brand new race, Obama, McCain. Does it make, and I can't remember all the other years you did. I didn't know if it makes a difference whether it's, like I said, incumbent race or brand new.
Typically, when you hit these types of years, it's like 2008 was a change year. We've had George W. Bush for 8 years at that point. 2016 was a change year. The country went from leaning one way to the other. Typically, these re-election years are not so much change years as the 8-year cycle. So it's unusual that this would be. But you look at the midterms in 2018 and you see, there was a significant voter backlash and swing the other way. And going into this election, there are signs that it will continue in 2020 to go that same way. But that doesn't mean both sides won't be energized. I expect them to be as energized. I really do. If everything works out the way, if we didn't have COVID-19, I have no doubt this would be the highest voter turnout in U.S. history, both percentage-wise and total electorate. But the COVID-19 and the way people vote is going to really kind of change that a bit. I think fewer people will vote because they just won't be sure how to vote.
That was going to be my question. How much COVID not existing, which we all wish for, but would your recommendation, your thoughts be different without that layer to this, or does that layer just add to the volatility of the
if we weren't dealing with the pandemic right now, I think it would be a lot easier to make your case, because you could do a lot more outreach. You could hold types of events that would draw people in to get information out. You could do a voter outreach campaign at the doors without putting people in harm's way or making people uncomfortable. I think it would make your job as a levy committee, would make their job much easier to get the message out. In a local race like this, nothing beats that one-on-one direct voter contact, over the fence, on the front porch, in the backyard. That word of mouth is not as strong today as it might have been, a year or two ago, just because folks aren't seeing each other and talking about the same things the same way. So yeah, I think if the health climate were better, the political climate would be better as well.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Sorry, I had one more. Just waiting to see if anybody else was chiming in. For vote by mail, you mentioned that they may not be mailing out the cards. Can you just give us a little bit more background? And then also, I understand our president is not supporting vote by mail either, and that could affect what happens locally. So can you talk a little bit more about the uncertainty around that? And
right now, the Secretary of State has the power to mail vote by mail applications in presidential years, and he's done that. Frank LaRose has already said he wants to do that. The state legislature right now is debating whether or not to take that away from him, to not allow him to mail those out. And the way that would work is, basically every registered voter would get just an application in the mail. You'd fill it out. You'd have to use your own postage and return it. What he was proposing would have postage on that, so you could return that and then you get your ballot. So it really, I don't think the president's desire to have less vote by mail will have much significance in Ohio unless the legislature kind of follows that lead and takes his lead. I think the governor right now supports vote by mail. The way things have worked the last few presidential cycles is very similar to the way it is right now. So the only concern I would have is if they changed it to take some of those opportunities away from folks to vote by mail. I would have to believe the governor would probably veto it. The only question is, would the legislature have enough to override a veto? It's still up in the air, and they're going to have to make that decision really soon. I think they've probably got, you know, another couple of weeks, and then it's got to wrap up, because boards of elections, we've got 88 boards of elections in the state. They're all going to have to prepare for this fall.
That was it for me. Does anybody else have any questions for Anthony? Anthony, if you want to stay on, we have a presentation a little bit later with the different levy scenarios. If you guys are okay with it, it might be nice to keep him in the audience here in case a specific question were to come up. So if you're available, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around. Yeah, I mean, unless you've got executive session or you would like me to step out, I'm happy to do that too.
Okay. Well, we would just direct a question to you if it were to come up. It may not come up, but it might be nice to have you here as a resource.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Any other questions for Mr. Fosicek? All right, seeing none, I'm going to turn over the meeting to Dr. Hunt for his reports.
Thank you. My volume okay?
Good.
Okay, 2 items tonight. Annually, I have to address Senate Bill 210. That's the USDA smart snack requirement that basically dictates that states or snacks and beverages sold to students during the regular school day meet nutrition guidelines for total fat, saturated fat, calories, and sugar. The Chagrin Falls Exempted Village School District is compliant with the rule, as all snacks and beverages that we sell to students during the school year meet Senate Bill 210's nutrition requirements. So I have to kind of go through that piece every year with the school board. So any questions on Senate Bill 210? Be the quickest item I have all year. The next thing I wanted to just briefly talk about are
Your mic, Bob.
Better?
Yeah.
Next thing I wanted to briefly talk about was our reentry reopening plan. We've had a central office team that's been working on this for over the last month or so. We've got about an 18 or 19 page document that we've handed off to building design teams. Those design teams are meeting in the next 2 weeks to help bring together various options. I'm hoping by the 17th of June to be able to share some of those and get some board feedback and some input. Tonight I shared just a draft of really the first page or 2 of that document, and I wanted to at least kind of share with you the core beliefs of what is guiding that work. So we kind of established these as the pillars, the things that we believe most in that should drive the work of this team moving forward. So I'm just going to quickly review some of those, and I'm happy to answer questions on the process, or if you have other things we should be considering, this is certainly the time at a very high level to jump in. So obviously the first one is we believe that safety and well-being of our students, staff, and community has to be the most important priority. We had expected earlier this week that the governor would release a guidance document. That was put on hold. I think he's going to address tomorrow in his press conference some of the things with schools, but if you did happen to catch him, I think it was Monday, he was pretty darn clear we are going to open schools in whatever capacity that we can. So we're preparing to do that, and whatever guidance we have from the health department will be kind of the number one priority in terms of our planning for reopening. We continue to value the partnership with our parents. I think we have had a very good partnership, and I think that partnership was tested a little bit in this digital environment, certainly depending on the age of your student. The importance of communication and consistent communication and feedback. It's one of the things that resonated from the survey was this idea of giving us more regular and consistent feedback. So that's a kind of a foundational belief and pillar as well. The third, I think our teaching staff did an excellent job that yes, if we're in a blended learning or a virtual environment, academics is obviously our core business, but also is the social and emotional development of our students. And number three in core beliefs really makes a commitment that we believe in that social emotional health, and we have to find a way to incorporate it in all of the plans that we offer. The fourth kind of acknowledges the unique time that we're in. We realize that regardless of how we come back, if there's restrictions, there may be, or there will be, a percentage of parents that are not comfortable or unable to send due to health restrictions their children to school. So we believe we must have a flexible plan that meets the needs of a variety of learners, and we're designing it kind of in that capacity now. And then the last one is really about this idea of opportunity in crisis, and we've continued to talk about this message with our staff, looking for opportunities. So on the other side of this, we hopefully are better at what we do when we return to quote unquote normal. So these are really the kind of the tenets or the core beliefs of our planning that we shared. I certainly can answer questions about these or process, but I wanted to get them out on your radar as at least the defining priorities or parameters that our design teams are working with. So any questions or comments?
So my one, I guess I have two comments in that the survey you did a few weeks back of parents and teachers, two numbers that jumped out at me was 20% of teachers saying they want to be completely virtual. That scares me because if the reason teachers are saying that is because if they came to school, they may have to make a decision of whether or not either putting someone at risk in their house or something like that. If a lot of those teachers didn't come to school, you're going to have a big problem first day of school because a lot of teachers just aren't going to show up. So that's one thing. And I think looks like you're covering that, so I like that. And the second one is 10% of families say they wanted to stay virtual. I'm concerned about that because I think that if those families chose not to go to school with us, and they did online schooling, is that something that would cost us $6,000 per family?
It would if we chose, I was on a call earlier this morning with a superintendent who's contracting out with a virtual learning platform. So in that scenario, we would be paying that virtual online platform to handle our kids. The models that we're developing have people designated in various ways, depending on kind of what we bring to you, where our staff is creating that virtual environment. And in that realm, it wouldn't be additional dollars.
Right. So if you weren't doing that, so I was happy to see that, then that is a potential $1 million hit to the budget if 10% of families were to do online learning.
Yeah. So if you take 10% of, just.
I did 170 times 6 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wait, can I clarify? If a family decides to not enroll in the district because they're homeschooling their student, whether it's virtual or attending a private school, do we pay the $5,500 per student?
Not if they're homeschooling, but if they are going to a community school, an online community school, then yes, we pay $6,020 per student. It comes straight out of our foundation.
And we have online community school in Ohio is that what K-12 is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's multiple options.
Yeah.
So, but you're underscoring, Bob, that it's kind of a moot point because we would have some sort of virtual experience for students. And I think that's important. I was on that call today with the Cleveland Clinic where they were giving some advice about, the opening of school. And this is, our level and also college level advice. But, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that if a student tests positive, they're going to need to quarantine for 2 weeks. And it would be a shame for them to not, be able to achieve their education during that time. And if one of their family members tests positive, they may choose to quarantine, or they may have some type of isolation period as well. So I'm glad that you're looking at, I guess you would call it some type of a blended environment. Even if the majority of the students are back in the classroom, we have allowed for, I mean, unfortunately, it is very likely that as we open up, you know, the illnesses are going to pop up. That's part of what opening up means, and that we're allowing for our staff and our students to still continue to do their job if possible.
Hey, Catherine, I have a question. Did you mean by quarantine that if someone was tested positive, obviously they need to be out till they're no longer positive? Were you thinking quarantine meant the people in class with them need to be quarantined?
No, that question was asked. That's not the advice right now. And this is just from the Cleveland Clinic. So obviously there are lots of entities out there that are weighing in on this, but no, but if a student were to test positive, any person in the world who tests positive should be quarantining for 2 weeks minimum to make sure that they're not going to infect anybody else. I think we would have to develop local policies on what we do if a student were to test positive, and how we would then, and maybe Bob, this is something you'll give us more information on later, but we would have an internal procedure for what we would do in that classroom.
Yeah, and that is actually addressed in the ODE document. You know, how to, there's kind of a decision tree framework that they give you. If X happens, this is what you should do. I think part of what we're going to get from ODE is we're going to get a lot of clarity on the health side, cleaning recommendations, social distancing, masks, those types of things, and then a lot of very vague direction on how you actually accomplish it. That's really going to be a local decision, but we do have to be prepared for kids to go in and out, and maybe buildings to go in and out. I mean, you could be in a situation where you need to shut down a building and turn the virtual component on while other buildings are still operating. So it's going to be pretty fluid.
One thing that came up during that call as well was a recommendation to have a point person who is, Mr. Coronavirus or Mrs. Coronavirus, kind of like our SRO, like an expert within the district who is managing and the implementation of the policy. You probably have already thought about that. And then the second thing was a pledge. At the clinic, they've all taken a pledge to not only practice all of the behaviors that help prevent the spread of the disease, but also to monitor their temperatures and things like that, and not come to work if they're sick. And I thought that was a nice idea as well to adopt within the district.
So the goal would be to get some feedback from you on these models at our June 17th meeting. And then I want to do a very, very targeted survey to parents on, if these are the options, which one would you choose? Where would you fall? Because that will really drive a lot of other decisions. Probably the biggest driver and biggest question mark is transportation. When you look at transportation and they tell you only 24 students on a bus, that really limits what you can do in terms of getting kids to school. So I will roll all of this out in more detail. I wanted to start kind of at a high level this evening and give you kind of those, guideposts, if you will, that we've provided to our design teams. And I have a little presentation, and I'll include in the board report if you're so interested in it, but it's really built around the theme of Apollo 13, that they were faced with a situation where they actually had to rebuild the rocket to get home. And I feel like that's what we have to do. We have to rebuild our system to re-enter and reopen. And that's kind of what we're tasked with, and the work that we're going through now with our teachers and our administrative team. So if there's no more questions there, and again, happy feedback offline, or if you read something in here you'd like a little more information, let me know. Bob,
did you say that is social distancing, you think, can be required in schools? And if so, does that mean we're only going to have half the kids at a time on campus?
Very likely scenario. All
right. So for blended learning, that's very important too then, since only half will be on campus at any time. So they'd have to be getting the content somehow. Okay.
If there's no other questions, that would conclude my report.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. Next, we're going to move on to the treasurer's report. So, Mrs. Brudno, I'll turn over the floor to you.
Okay. I do not have a formal report. We went finally one whole week with nothing changing in our financial situation. So I don't have any new information for you. But given that we don't have a decision yet, I assumed we wanted to continue the discussion on Levy and maybe given some of the information that we received tonight, where the board members are leaning toward. I know we had it down to potentially leveraging the 3.85 that's falling off in November, or if we are going to wait until the spring. Going forward, we were talking 7.9, combined, of course, with all of the cuts that we've been working on. So I will.
And Bob, obviously we had Mr. Fosachuk join us tonight and gave some very insightful thoughts. I know we talked also about, or we discussed also having other firms come in as well. Are we going to do that, or are they going to be at future meetings or not?
So I have one call still out with Burgess and Burgess. Allerton, who's out of Columbus, that does a lot of school campaigns, said, happy to talk to a board member too, but wasn't real comfortable coming in a full board meeting. So I'll continue to attempt to reach the person at Burgess and bring them next week if I can, but I have not had a whole lot of success making contact with them right now.
Okay.
They consulted with the Shaker School Board. I did get a chance to talk to their president. You may know they decided to hold off on their levy for a year. And her input was that it was largely because of what Burgess and, well, they actually had 3 firms come in and talk to them. So Bob, if you want those names, I can tell you, but she felt Burgess and Burgess was the most detailed. And although every community is unique, they cited many of the same things that we heard from Anthony tonight about the noise in the arena around the fall campaign and the difficulty with getting a message out, getting people to hear you. You may have a great message, but if people don't hear it, they're going to vote, typically no for any type of tax that they see on the ballot. Shaker has done some, I think they've done some TV ads and things like that. So he also advised them that it would be quite a bit more expensive just to buy time in a crowded, election year. So they would need to budget appropriately for their campaign if they were going to go during this fall. So I don't know if that helps or not, but Ashley, would you remind us the timeline? We know we're getting close to a decision here, and as I recall, it's early July, but could you just remind us when we have to pass our first resolution?
The final resolution has to be certified to the county on August 5th. So just pulling up my calendar here because I will have the already scheduled board meetings on it. So before August 5th, we have July 8th or July 22nd. So we could pass the first one at the 8th, the second one at the 22nd. Or if we needed to move it back another week, we could do that. We would just have to schedule a special meeting.
And they have to be at 2 separate meetings, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I have said before, I think in a rapidly changing landscape, it's worthwhile to wait until absolutely necessary. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to move forward. And we may know what we're going to do, but then not actually vote on it until we have to, take those final votes in case something were to change in the landscape that would change our position.
So you're recommending going to May of 2021? So,
I think he was saying
is that what I understood?
July 8th to make the final decision.
Oh, that's what you're saying. Okay.
Greg, were you asking me a question?
I was wondering, I was trying to interpret what you said. So I obviously misunderstood, so I'm glad I asked.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was saying that we might come up with a decision tonight, for example, and get on the same page about what we think makes sense. Okay. But I would recommend we not start to pass the resolutions until we absolutely have to, because that buys us time, and time is valuable when you have such a changing environment. That's all I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That says hold off till July 8th. I mean, I'm okay with that, but we're gonna have to be ready that to make a decision and hopefully find consensus on that date. So I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be good to go ahead and discuss it, at least to flush it out, to decide, which direction we're all heading before we get there.
To be clear, you should have consensus before that July 8th, because you would want to make your first vote on July 8th.
Yeah.
So we would need the resolution ready.
I didn't mean to imply that we should talk tonight or we shouldn't come to agreement tonight, for example. Just saying, as far as passing the resolutions,
yeah,
we would wait. So sorry if I was not clear about that.
No problem. We're all feeling through this. So
well, I appreciate Anthony coming tonight. I appreciate his guidance and suggestions. Just from my personal experience, I think I worked on at least 4 levy campaigns here. I think we have the unique opportunity with the 3.85 mils falling off that I would not want to lose that and wait till spring. I would rather try in the fall, and if it's unsuccessful, to come back again. But that's my feelings.
To me, what I'm scared about is if one of the primary things driving like the uncertainty right now is the economy. I don't think the economy is going to be that different from the fall to the spring. So I think the economy is going to be the same. In addition, I actually think from the pandemic standpoint, whatever issues we're having in the fall, we're going to be having in the spring. In fact, the spring might even be worse based on some of the predictions, because you're going to go through a flu season with it. So the uncertainty that's happening, I feel is going to be, now I'm predicting the future. So hopefully I'm completely wrong about this. So I feel like the uncertainty around the two dates is going to be basically the same. So the issue, obviously, the presidential election. So what Anthony was saying about the election, when you have the I forget the term he used, but the voter who doesn't vote much.
Uninformed.
Uninformed voter voting. Obviously scares me a little bit about the fall. What scares me about the spring is just people not coming out to vote, because I'm scared the pandemic's still going on. It's going to be vote by mail. You're not going to be able to really go door to door again. I'm scared about like you basically be going to door to door the same in the fall as you would be doing in the spring. So in one sense, what I really liked about the fall election is that I knew people were going to vote. What scares me about the spring election is I don't know if people are going to vote. Therefore, I think it's a much more representative of our community having it in the fall, because I think most people are going to vote in the fall. Therefore, we'll know where the community stands. And the fall has the advantage of the no increase in money from a tax standpoint. So I don't know, I'm predicting the future, but that's, I guess, what we have to do. So that's sort of where I am on it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of the same concerns. I do like the timing of, I'm very concerned about missing the opportunity of 385 coming off and not seizing the opportunity to go in with no new taxes. I'm very concerned about that falling off and then about having to get it back again, just knowing the psychology of economics of the consumer and also being obviously very concerned about the economy, and it's not going to turn around quickly from everything that I see and everything that I know of economics. So I'm concerned about the 385 falling off and then not retaining it, as well as the economy being rough for quite a period of time. So I'm leaning towards this fall in 385.
I agree with all the points that you all have made. I think the economy is very uncertain. I think voter turnout can be very uncertain. We definitely want to capitalize on the fact that the 3.85 is falling off. I think where I differ is slightly, I have a little bit more of a marketing mindset, and that I think we can still message appropriately that 3.85 came off. I think there is a way to weave that into a message in the spring. But I think for me, the biggest difference could be the ability to get airtime and to get the message across. And the fall campaign relies on making sure our voters understand their taxes aren't going up. There are probably ways to do that. I just think it will be quite a bit more complicated, not being able to have coffees, town halls, go to sporting events and things like that. It's just and I think this, just think about how many people you have talked to in person over the last month versus a year ago. So it's going to be difficult to get the word out, where I think that could be a difference in the spring. There could be, first of all, there won't be as much noise in the arena. And I think it'll be easier to get the message out, and there's at least a possibility of some changes, as we've seen with the way schools are going to be opening up. There'll be something that's a little bit better, hopefully, for us to be looking forward to. But again, a lot of ifs, and I get that. Greg, with regard to voter turnout, I would just say that we've been very effective with our May Levy campaigns in making sure we get the information to people and then reminding them to go vote. And you may know that the Levy Committee works tirelessly leading into the campaign, into Election Day and on that day, to make sure they're calling and reminding and texting and whatever can be done to remind the supporters of the school levy to go vote. So I guess I would say you could look to other May campaigns to see what turnout has been. Although I agree with you, I think there's a lot of unknowns with regard to where the disease is going to be, and
my main concern was with COVID. Yeah, so
right. And
I agree. If a normal year, yeah, I completely agree with you.
Right. So that's but I have been kind of standing in the minority in this viewpoint. So I will support whatever the board decides to do. I think that we need to go out and let our community know that we really need these funds, and make sure that our message is heard. And so we're just got to make sure that happens, whether we do the fall or the spring.
I hear consensus from the other board members that we should move forward in the fall. And I think that it's a difficult decision before us, and there's no obvious right answer. So we just need to really do our best if we go forward in the fall. One thing that's important to me is, from the marketing side of things, we really need to leverage, the Levy Committee really needs to leverage every parent in the district. And I think we need to be thinking about this as, in the past, we have a Levy Committee of, a dozen or so people who work hard to get the message out and then to get the vote out. And I think we need to look at this as every parent in the district needs to understand why they need to support the schools and be able to communicate it effectively to their neighbors on the district's behalf. So I think every parent in the district needs to be part of this virtual Levy Committee. And I think we need to have a really clear, concise message about it's no additional cost, but also if it fails and we have to come back in the spring, that it has to be at least 7.9. And I think people need to understand that from the onset, because I think that is pretty critical in setting us up for a better chance of success in the fall. So my input at this point is really around the marketing of the fall and some ideas about how we move forward. But I will support going out in the fall for 385 as well.
Karen, I thought you would bring up the point you brought up in the past about the cycle. And I would resonate that if there's any way we can say this will be a 3-year levy, I think we need to do that. My opinion about it does change if it's a 2-year cycle. I think it's going to be very difficult to get this passed and then have the next one be within 2 years. There's going to be voter fatigue, support fatigue. People will forget. They'll say, we just voted on, we just gave you money. So I would be concerned about that next levy, and the longer out we could go, obviously the better.
Yeah, no, I was assuming, since the scenarios we've been looking at have been 3.85 for 3 years, I was assuming that it would be a minimum of 3 years. I think it's one of the reasons why I think that's particularly important is in this instance is all of the uncertainty. And if we have to go back on the ballot a second time, and we've only set the budget up for it to last 2 years, we're suddenly looking at back-to-back levies and putting the district in and that's, I don't think, fiscally prudent. So I would support 3.85 in the fall, but I definitely feel it needs to be a 3-year cycle.
I think we need to be clear as well that if it does not pass, or even if it passes, the cuts that we've made are not items that are coming back. This millage is significantly reduced from what the actual need was. We've reduced it because of COVID-19 and because of the downturn in the economy. And I think we really need to leverage that message and make sure that everybody understands that those cuts were made in combination with this millage, not as a result of failing that. So if it were to pass, those things that we have cut are not coming back. They're still, we had to kind of weigh some things and increase revenue and decrease expenses.
I summarized that in the board brief that I think is going to be delayed a little bit in the super news, but that is really on the district. I think for us to message very strongly what these cuts are, what our financial position is. So I think we should, I'm sure you're already starting to put together some communication pieces that really help our community understand our financial position. And then of course, turning things over to a levy committee as soon as we pass that first resolution to, as quickly as possible, start getting the word out and messaging about what's coming up this fall. We need to get out of the gate on this quickly.
Yep. Okay, anything further, Mrs. Bruno?
Not from me.
Great. Moving on, so we're to audience community participation. I've not been contacted by anybody this week. Ms. Bruno or Dr. Hunt, have you been contacted?
I have not.
Neither have I.
Okay, great. Moving on. So now we have, can I have a motion for consent agenda items 9A through 9C?
So moved by Mary Kay, seconded by Sharon.
That was quick. All right, Mrs. Bruno, is there any discussion over the items? All right, seeing none. Mrs. Bruno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger.
Yes.
Mrs. Bros.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Okay, can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendations 10A through 10G?
So moved.
All right. Mr. Kanzinger and Mrs. O'Toole. Dr. Hunt, if you want to comment on any of these.
Sure. Item A is the replacement of a teacher at Chagrin Falls Intermediate School. We talked about the resignation at the high school last week and how that kind of bumped through. Alana has been a ESC tutor in the intermediate school, and we're recommending her for the 5th grade ELA position. As I told the board last week, we are holding on the replacement of that ESC position as one of the saving measures. Item B are our tutors for next school year. Item C is a recommendation to continue to employ Nancy Kevern as the tech integration instructional coach. Again, not additional position, just suggesting she come back for next year to support us through the work going into the kind of the digital environment. Item D is stipend payments. I think important to note there, those come out of Title II grant funds. So we do get federal dollars, and there are certain areas you have to spend those dollars. So this will support the work regarding the ELA program. Item E is a recommendation for those that are participating in the redesign team, giving us teacher perspective and input regarding our reopening plan. Item F is the ESY services. We're required to offer those to special education students. And item G is also extended school year services required by IDEA.
Bob, I just had a clarification about the cost savings for the ESC position.
Yep.
And thank you for clarifying that we're not adding a staff member with that item. Is it your recommendation that we would re-employ in the ESC position after about a year when we get back to a normal learning environment?
Yeah, that savings was put in as 1 year. I do believe in our more traditional environment, that position to be absolutely necessary.
Okay, so we'll have a 1 year savings, and then next year we re-employ the ESC potentially.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying.
The spreadsheets reflect that as well.
Okay, any other questions, any other discussion? Okay, Ms. Brudno, if you would please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Okay, great. Moving on to treasurer's recommendations. Can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendations 11A through 11C?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Brudno, if you'd like to comment on these.
I will. Item A is a then and now certificate. This is for the electricity at the middle school. The budget, the way it was in the beginning of the year, we had to move some money around from one building to another. So the money was not in there for her to get the purchase order in on time. Item B is donations. I did send an email out earlier today. If you did not see it, originally this was B and C were all in one item. I separated those this afternoon, so I apologize for the late change. Item B is items that were donated to the district, and we are recommending acceptance of those donations. From Bark and Pat Jackson from Jackson Comfort Systems, $110 for 250 feet of 18/10 thermostat cable. I have no idea what that means or if I'm saying that correctly, but that's what was given to me. And 52 facial masks from Fellowship Bible Church. Item C is a donation that we as a district are making to Bainbridge Food Pantry in Sugar Falls Park. This was as a result of COVID. Once we shut down, we already had a large order out. Items were paid for and received, and we had them here because we were not operating the food service program like we normally would. We had extra food on hand. Those items were expiring or going to expire, and we needed to do something with them rather than just let them sit there. So the recommendation is to donate those items. Things like chips, bagged snacks, granola bars, and cereals, and some bottled beverages. The estimated value on that's $395. Items that we had already purchased. So I'm recommending your approval of these items.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or discussion? All right, Ms. Brudno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to other business. I have something. I actually received a letter dated May 22nd from Dr. Keenan. And I'm going to have to read this, so I can't look at your faces while I'm reading it. So this is a letter from Dr. Keenan of the executive director of the Martha Holdren Jennings Foundation. Dr. Hunt, congratulations. I'm very pleased to inform you that you have been selected the winner of the 2020 Jennings, Ohio Superintendent Outstanding Performance Award. So this is one of the highest awards the foundation bestows on an educator. And there will be a dinner that will follow up. They're congratulating him on the prestigious award, as am I. So congratulations, Dr. Hunt.
That's excellent, Bob. Congratulations.
Wonderful.
Is that
Surprised, you must have already known.
Phil, is that an Ohio thing or is that a national thing?
That's Martha Holdren Jennings is in Ohio, predominantly.
Ohio. Okay.
Well, we talked about this. You're supposed to
Universe.
have
I'm sorry, it's the universe. Universe. That was,
yeah.
You have a speech prepared, Dr. Hunt?
no, I'm just really glad. We actually wrote this around the blended learning pilot we were trying to do in the high school coming into this year, which seems to have a lot of irony now. And it comes with an award to support programming and teacher professional development. So we're bringing dollars into the district to help with that. So really happy in that regard. And certainly I have a great staff team, administrative team, teaching staff that I feel very fortunate to work here. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. A very well-deserved award. It obviously did all the work leading up to it. Greatly appreciate that. And, you know, not only is a great award, I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful certificate. I don't know, maybe a cape, something like that involved too. But $10,000. So that's quite an award for the school district. So thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, to be clear, that money comes to the district.
Good clarification. Any other business?
I think we also wanted to point out that the schedule for the board member contributions to the Super News is amended from what we approved in January. I think we just made a mistake when we approved those minutes. So Catherine, you are doing May, correct?
Right. It looks like it'll be May/June.
Yeah, right.
Graduation issue and November.
Okay.
That way Phil doesn't have to do 4 of them.
Thank you. One of my most treasured activities. All right. Anything else for other business?
Just to put on your radar, I did put something in board report last week. Obviously, we're going to do the videotaping the week of June 22nd for the graduation diplomas. Asked if there's any board members that have an interest to be involved, to let me know that. We're going to we definitely cannot bring all of the board in at once, but we certainly could rotate you through. And if there's certain alphabets or places you'd like to be, let us know that. And speaking of writing, Mr. Rankin, I'm sure you are well into your speech, but we will record that on June 22nd as well. And I'll give you a heads up on timing and all of that.
My kids ask me about it weekly, so I think they're very disappointed. They're not going to get to see me in front of the whole football stand saying it.
I like the idea of a schedule, just rotating, one of us in, but allowing all 5 board members to participate. As you know, it's one of the great joys of being on the school board, to participate in such a culminating event for our students. So, unless somebody is, precluded from participating, it seems like that makes sense. And then, like you said, if somebody has a particular part of the alphabet, they could just let Phil know, as we would, normally do for a graduation ceremony.
So what I'll probably do, I think Monica finished this. I'm not sure it went out today or not, but it's going out in the next couple of days. We actually have time slots assigned Most of them are alpha. There was a few people that had conflicts, so we had to bump them around. I'll share that out with the board, and you guys can just kind of let me know which days work, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and I think I sent you an email. If you need, just hands to direct traffic or whatever, to not be one of the 10 people on the field, I can be available that week to, be the person, that stands at the beginning of the stadium and says, okay, you can go in now or something. So
Yeah.
please feel free to.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'll be there for the Ks.
Got it.
Ditto on the bees.
Already making progress.
All right, great. Anything else? All right, seeing none, moving on. So our next meeting will be Wednesday, June 17th on Zoom. And if I could have a motion for executive session.
In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22, the Chagrin Falls Board of Education will go into executive session for the sole purpose of the consideration of any of the following matters. Employment, conference with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are subject of pending or imminent court action, and preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
I will second that motion.
Okay, Ms. Brudno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right.
You don't expect further action, right?
We do not expect further action. You were sent a separate invite for executive session. And once again, I think we lost him, but I want to thank Anthony for giving us his time tonight.
Yes, absolutely. His time and his insights.
So it is 7:19. Can we take a 3-minute break and I'll see you in executive session?
That's good.
Thank you very much.
So it's 7:22.
Or 3.5 minutes.
Guys.